it felt like you had to choose. It felt like a fork in the road. Oh, am I someone who's interested in Star Trek and Star Wars and wants to imagine space aliens and all that really cool stuff? Or one of these squares who believes in like world religions and or
Yeah.
Christianity in particular?
Thank you for coming, Michael. I'm really excited to have you. This was okay. So I'll be honest. I've been in a reading slump for a while. The This is partially myself. It's partially the fact that most stuff that gets published nowadays is, let's be honest, total crap. And particularly in terms of premise, everything has been redone and done and done and redone and done and redone. Most people don't try the odd, the experimental, the unexpected, because most people will never publish that stuff. And trying out the self-publishing route is for the brave. And so when I have something come along in front of me that is experimental, brave, self-published, and recommended by Christopher Rocchio, I'm like, okay, this is interesting. And in spite of that, it still took me months to get to it, and that's not Michael's fault. It's everybody else's fault. But once I finally got through it, I have to say, Pilgrims by M.R. Leonard is one of the most interesting and unexpected reading experiences of my life. So, Michael, thank you for making my reading life a little bit more exciting.
I'm so honored and grateful, Nicholas. Yeah, I always knew you have so many doubts. This is my debut novel, and there's so much doubt, and especially going the self-publishing route associated with that. But there was one thing I was quite confident on pretty much the whole way, that this is an original book. You don't see similar books like that on the shelf, which is partly what inspired me to write it. You say write what you would love to read, and
Mhm.
this was a good example of that. So I had to get it out of my head, and it took about 3 years from the start till you had it in your hands, and here we are.
So, Michael, tell me a little bit about your journey to this point. How did you decide to be an author? What was it that inspired this story? How did you get to this point where you are here?
So I've always had a pretty kind of vivid imagination, but I'm from kind of a middle class family where not many people kind of venture out of the defined pathways, and the artistic world was considered kind of luxurious. So even though in undergrad I wrote screenplays, I went to Boston College for undergrad. I wrote the screenplays actually as part of a screenwriting class, but that was to kind of partly to fulfill a credit of the core curriculum. So I kind of put that part of myself to the side. It always kind of lingered in the background. And I started initially in a career in law, didn't go to law school, but then I became a China consultant, or to put it another way, I helped American companies that were looking to get into China, the American clients. So the way I got into that is it was 2008, 2009, the economy collapsed here in the US,
Yeah.
and I knew I didn't want to go to law school. And so I had a client at the law firm that was just doing deals in China. And I have no background in China. I have no Chinese family or anything like that, nor did this client. He was another Bostonian who just was kind of like an Indiana Jones around Asia. And I just said, well, I know I'm not going to go to law, so why don't I go work for you? And he said yes. And
Huh.
so I did that for 9 years, and that was a crazy experience.
Nine
Probably
years.
worth probably worth a novel on its own. In fact, a lot of the business people from that knew about my background there, they're like, "Oh, you wrote a book? Is it going to be a tell-all about all that time there?" And it's like, actually, no, it's about Catholic aliens coming to Earth. But I did that for a while and kind of realized that there what professionally wasn't a future in it. I kind of had a front row seat to the changing of the U.S. China relationship before a lot of people did, and I was like, I got to do something else. So I went to MIT to get my MBA. And while I was there, I started a business. It was going great. MIT is a great place to launch a business out of. But that thing happened in March of 2020. I graduated in June of 2019.
Oh man.
So the business was going up. We had our best month in February of 2020.
Oh no.
We were about to go
Of
to
course you
venture
did.
capitalists. Yeah, exactly. And so that kind of it was actually it helped parents who needed childcare essentially book spots at high quality daycares. You could think of it like Uber for daycare. And
That's
for
the
a lot
worst
of
thing you could
reasons,
possibly do in February of
worse.
2020.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's so funny. Just 1 month changes everything. We had VCs interested,
Mhm.
we were kind of star childs coming out of MIT, and then COVID happens
Oh
and
my
everything
gosh.
changes after
Wow.
that. But while, that kind of caused a lot of soul searching, and I never had lost that interest of kind of exploring my creative passions. And I was talking to a mentor, and I'm like, okay, so here I am. I'm at this crossroads, and I'm trying to figure out what to do next. And he asked me, he goes, well, what do you want to do? And among the things I listed, I said, I'd love to get this story out of my head. In fact, my original plan was to sell our company. It would be success. I'd have an exit, in which case I could hire a ghostwriter to pull it out of my brain and just produce it. I can, but he's like, it's a global pandemic. You have Microsoft Word. There's no better time than the present. So you're either all talk
Mhm.
or you could actually try to do this. And 3 years later, here we are.
That's amazing. So the okay, so that's really interesting to me because it sounds like you did everything you possibly could except go the traditional route of, you know, going to a creative writing program, learning the nuts and bolts of the thing, querying agents forever, like all this stuff that people traditionally do before they go and end up self-publishing a book. You did all the other stuff that makes you an interesting person, which causes you to have that story in the first place. So how did you bridge that gap between, entrepreneurial minded business guy with a law background to somebody who writes airport fiction? Because that's what this is. This is like a technically proficient airport thriller.
Yeah, I
How
think
did that
that's
work?
that's a. I've had multiple people describe it as such,
Yeah,
unprompted, and I don't take offense to that. That is kind of what I was
that's a
going for.
compliment.
Yeah. So what? The China consultant is the short answer.
Mhm.
I spent years basically explaining to people why they needed to hire me and my firm, because you might think how China is, but it's
Uh-huh.
it's like going to another planet.
Yeah.
You land in the airport and there's like a shiny airport and tall buildings, and you go, oh, this is just like the West. And it's like, it's not at all.
Yeah.
And you can spend 10 years figuring that out and banging your head on the wall, or you can hire us and go up the learning curve. Not that we won't have challenges,
Yeah.
but that, so I kind of became a pro hiring help to get up the learning curve. I just think people undervalue education.
Mhm.
You can learn stuff online for free sometimes, or just by doing it yourself. But sometimes it really pays to just kind of learn quickly. So when I first went to write this book, I started kind of just writing.
Right.
Classic, open Microsoft Word, just start writing.
Yeah.
And I could read what I was producing and go like, this just is not a book. I've read a lot of books. I just assumed I could replicate that when I sat at a computer, but it's really can't. It's such a learned talent I've come to learn since then. And
Yeah.
so I started thinking, if only I could have the editor now. Like, how do you get do you have to finish the manuscript and send it to a publisher and get accepted? I didn't even know the process of querying at that
Yeah.
point.
Yeah.
And the answer is yes, but there's a lot more to it. So I started looking for essentially developmental editors who would work with me during the production
Oh, how
process.
interesting. Huh.
Yeah, so there's terms for it. I call it developmental editor. Some of them refer to themselves as a writing coach, and my guy
Okay.
kind of was, because different developmental editors had different attitudes.
Yeah.
Like some would say, like, write as much as you want and send me your pages, and we kind of interface almost like not snail mail, but almost with that same kind of pace, like, just send it when you have it and I'll get back to you when I can. But I spoke to this one guy, Kevin Johns, who's amazing, and he was like, so I expect pages every week, and we're going to go through them, and I'm going to teach you about it. So it really was like doing a creative writing master's degree with my editor, Kevin. And it, not only that, it's like a personal trainer. It keeps
Yeah.
you on focus, and it was super helpful for me. And I learned so much. And then as far as traditional versus self, I did try to go traditional. I did query. So
Mhm.
part of that was interesting process, because it taught me how to pitch the book and to sell it, which was useful. But I obviously opted not to go the traditional route. I have a lot
Yeah.
of thoughts about it, and I'm super satisfied with all the control I have as a
Yeah.
self-publisher. But you mentioned Christopher Rocchio. I've gotten to know him over this last 6 months, a year, and he is traditional published. Obviously, he does self as well, but he has also great insights about why traditional has advantages, and I think those are fair points and well taken. But that was kind of my process: bring on help early, and then I kind of went through it all. I tried the querying, and when that didn't work, I decided to go self.
That's awesome. Okay, so did you start with the premise? Did you start with the story? How did the whole idea of the traditional invasion fleet coming to Earth, uh, except that they're already Catholic converts. How did that idea even appear? Was it the story? Was it the premise? A little bit of both? Explain that to me.
Sunday school when I was a little boy. CCD, we called it. And I remember they must have thrown a video on for us in like eighth grade. And the video, it's interesting, especially thinking back on my catechesis. I would describe myself as to set the tone, a revert to the Catholic faith. I was raised going to church. I stopped going in my 20s, like a lot of people. And I came back to it in my 30s around the time I went back to MIT. So the catechesis was pretty weak, and I don't think we knew about the historicity of Christ at all.
Hmm.
Like, I think if you had asked me at age 7, I would have thought like it's a myth or something. I wouldn't have been able to identify that the faith believes it was a literal thing that
Yeah.
happened in a certain date and time. Look at your calendar.
Right.
But I think they must have put on a video for that, and it was like rainy day or something, so we're having us watch whatever movie, and they were referencing that. Was the first time I heard it, and at the same time, I'm like watching a ton of TV, like a late stage millennial. My parents didn't really regulate that all that much. A lot of unsolved mysteries in Discovery Channel, like Ancient Aliens. So I'm positive that these aliens are not only here but have been here for a while. So I made the connection as like a child in my head. I'm going, okay, here we go. The aliens have been here. Christ, the resurrection is actually a specific thing in history. They can just kind of tell us what happened and let us know, and that will solve everything. And so that was my childlike understanding of this premise. And it came back to me about 5, 6, 7 years ago. And I started
Fascinating.
thinking about it kind of with all the life experience I've had in between. I started going, no, that wouldn't solve everything. A and B. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, I think I can get a lot of drama out of that. And
Hmm.
so I became really motivated to write this story. And there's a kind of a mission aspect, as you will, that kind of carried me forward.
Hmm.
And I can double click on that, but I had the premise in mind, and I just thought it was so compelling and weirdly absent in the canon of sci-fi. I've said for a long time, I don't understand why my sort of book isn't a subgenre of sci-fi. Like, this book should have come out in 1955, and there should have been 1,000 derivative versions of it where the aliens show up and they're Islamic. The aliens show up merely to just fly by and say the resurrection didn't happen, and then scoot through the galaxy. They have their own. Sometimes you see them kind of evangelizing their own alien religion. That's been done a little bit, but
Yeah.
every world religion, all the versions of it. I don't know why it's not a subgenre. So I took it upon myself to set the tone, and I'm going to do it in a particular direction. But I want it to be accessible to all readers.
Okay, so the story is strong. The premise is something that attracted you as a child, but came back in a very strong way because you're strongly culturally connected and because you're a good storyteller. You're talking a little bit about mission here. As you're writing this thing, what is the thing that's propelling you forward? And we'll get to the specifics of the story, but I want to leave a section at the end for a bit more spoilery stuff, so we can talk more about the general stuff at the beginning, in
Love it.
case some of our listeners and viewers haven't yet read it. So for you, as you're writing this thing, how important is the mission aspect of it, and how do you make sure that it doesn't get in the way of story?
The mission, I think it goes back to that poor catechesis I had. I'd say there's a million reasons why I kind of fell away. One of them, though, and I'd say almost all of them have to do with me. Let's just be honest and put the due where it's truly due. However, there is one sense in which if not to exonerate myself, but to merely give proper critique where it's due. The catechesis I got was really weak, like really weak. And it's not just the church, there's also the society, the secular society. And we all know it. Like, if you're fans, clearly as a child with my background, I like that imaginary stuff. I like the Discovery Channel, the paranormal, like all that stuff, all the Star Wars, the things that really get your mind expanded. And it felt like you had to choose. It felt like a fork in the road. Oh, am I someone who's interested in Star Trek and Star Wars and wants to imagine space aliens and all that really cool stuff, or one of these squares who believes in like world religions and or
Yeah.
Christianity in particular? And that is such a awful shame. It is such an affront. And as I got older and this idea popped back into my head, I go, you know, not only is this a compelling narrative, I maintain that this is one of the most grounded alien first contact stories in the genre, like full stop. It is by far one of the most grounded. Usually, the motivations for why aliens come to Earth are very weak. They're here for eh, for a lot of reasons, or they're just kind of silly reasons. They're here for our water. They're here to steal our water. Like that makes no sense if you know the first thing about space. There is tons of frozen water that does not involve fighting Earthlings to get it. So there's so many things that are wrong with that. So I wrote it in terms of a mission because I think this genre is for those who are intellectually or imaginatively inclined, this genre is a huge source to them and is a major path to deconversion. And so I wanted to try to kind of impact that. Firstly, to claim the terrain of this subgenre by making every book from now on will be derivative of the Catholic aliens show up. So if someone writes it about the Islamic aliens who show up, it's a derivative of Pilgrims, and we claimed that terrain. We planted the flag first for the Christian team, but secondly, like I think the genre, and Christopher Rocchio talks about this at length as well. I know you have this feeling as well, Nicholas, that the genre for a lot of historically contingent reasons is super hostile to Christianity.
Yeah.
And like we can talk about, actually, Christopher does a much better job talking about why that's the case, like who were the personalities who
Yeah.
went in that direction. But what it's done is it's impoverished the genre because
Yeah.
a lot of great stories um, just are kind of reflexively avoided as a result. And there's so much that you can bring into it. And I think there's this hunger for people in the genre who have no faith at all to just kind of see worlds that are built that are more realistic, that take this sort of thing seriously. So I kind of came at it as like a Christian responding to my bad catechesis, but also as a sci-fi fan to the extent that I was like, this genre is getting stale. It's getting boring. Like, why, when they write a future world, like just my final point I'll say on this, uh, as sci-fi authors, we're all futurists. We're all trying to predict the future. As Frederick Pohl says, a good sci-fi is not predicting the automobile; it's describing the traffic jam. And so, like, that's what we're all up to. And there's so many worlds that are built by sci-fi authors where religion is either just gone or it's some like cargo cult version of a superstitious religion.
Yeah.
And I'll just make one prediction right here. If we were to fast forward humanity 2,000 years, like I don't have much that I can really say intelligently about what that will look like, but one of my highest conviction predictions would be that Christianity, Islam, and Judaism are probably still extant in the year 4024 AD. They've been around for that long, so but you would never know that reading sci-fi at all, or for the most part. And it's time for that to change. And I think readers are hungry for that. So that's kind of one thing that was motivating me. A kind of harried sci-fi fan who wanted to kind of reclaim the genre as sci-fi fan and not just as a Catholic.
Not just sci-fi, because there are a few. In particular it kind of, and I mean this in the best way, a kind of escapist, pulpy, adventurous sci-fi that by default is almost always materialistic as a rule. Even somebody as apparently religious as Orson Scott Card makes this point in his. He's got a book on a Writer's Digest guide on how to write fantasy and sci-fi, and he's absolutely unequivocal in the fact that you cannot have any supernatural or metaphysical explanations for scientific concepts in sci-fi. So when he does something like rewrite the Book of Mormon in a sci-fi setting, which he did, it's a 5-book series called Homecoming. It's a very strange series, which I read the whole thing. It's actually quite fascinating if you have enough stomach for it. But um, that whole thing, even though it's religious to the core, ultimately he describes the the presence of God as something more like an animate earth, a kind of Gaia, as opposed to a transcendent God who's beyond the physical. So even somebody as um, obviously religious, even in a religion like more like Mormonism, feels himself unable to push into that space openly. He has to talk about it sideways. In Speaker for the Dead, he's got Catholics there, but it's the Catholics as culture, not Catholics as
Mhm.
religious faith, that's important. And there are two other books. I think I mentioned them to you. One's called The Sparrow by Maria Russell. Uh, I forgot the name. And then the other one is Book of Strange New Things by Michael Leonard. But both of those books are they're considered by some to be sort of literary and kind of high concept books, but not a lot of people have read them because
Yeah.
they're not very pleasant. So what you did here is quite remarkable. And let's talk a little bit about the premise. um, because you wrote this with the intention of this being a fast-paced thriller kind of read, while not at all shying away from the idea that revelation is possible outside of the confines of Earth and outside of the confines of the human experience. But you then do the absolutely bonkers thing of taking your source to be Augustine's Confessions, which, I mean, good grief. Can you choose anything like less likely to become a sci-fi book? How did that happen?
Yeah, that is like I said. I mean, I had so many trepidations, but I was like, "This is definitely original." I'll get you that. I have not seen a sci-fi remake of The Confessions. Uh,
No.
to add that to the pile of kind of new directions. Why I did that, I'll tell you exactly why. Clearly the premise came into my brain first.
Mm.
Aliens showing up, and instead of saying "Take me to their leader," kind of pronouncing, "This is the one religion as far as we're concerned. Good luck, Earthlings." So that's the premise that was more or less in my head, obviously with a Christian and Catholic kind of angle. But like a lot of things, when I was first talking about this ideas with some people in the sci-fi space, they wanted me to do. One person suggested that I do something along the lines of like a World War Z, because it's a very global story. When aliens show up in the sky, it impacts the entirety of humanity, and a lot of stories that handle that kind of narrative. There's Invasion on Amazon. It's a new series they spent a lot of money on. That's quite terrible.
Oh, you don't like
But
it?
you
I
know
haven't
they
seen it yet.
Oh, it's terrible. Like I wouldn't I haven't seen season two because season one was a slog.
Hmm.
So, and I wanted to like it. I'm not trying to be like comic book guy over here. Like I
Right.
like art to succeed, but it's so painful when it doesn't.
Yeah.
But they switch between perspectives and POVs all around the world. Even Independence Day, you see something like
Yep.
that.
Yep.
And I was really into that, and I thought, yeah, that maybe for subsequent or novellas we can talk about like what was the reaction in the Philippines to these aliens showing up. Maybe I can walk through some characters. I mean, I have a lot to say about China and how that would be impacted. I'd love to talk about that, but I just kind of had the perspective that all I wanted to tell the story and I wanted to resonate. I didn't want to just showcase a premise. Like I wanted to people intuited stories and they have to journey with the character. So I said I want it to be a single character, and what better arc is there than Saint Augustine? So it just popped into my head, and I said, okay, it's going to be loosely based on the Confessions, which is has the added benefit of so few people have even heard of the Confessions. So I put it right on the back cover, a sci-fi retelling of the Confessions. One, to the extent that I get criticism on that, and they say like, "You're no Saint Augustine," I'm like, absolutely, you're right. Like do not substitute my work with the Confessions.
It's not a
But what I'm
memoir. It's not a memoir.
it's not a memoir. Not only that, I mean, there's no the impact. It's not
Yeah.
in two different universes. But what it does, it's kind of a breadcrumb. There have been a lot of people who are like, oh, "What's this Confessions thing?" And what's ironic is Confessions would have been as kind of culturally iconic as, say, Romeo and Juliet, such that people who never even read a book would know that such a book as Confessions existed. But that's not true anymore,
Yeah.
and which is a shame. So it really had to do with St. Augustine's arc, which is unbeatable, but the added benefit that I could toss people in the direction of this great work and hopefully get people to rediscover it while they're enjoying some pulpy airport fiction.
That's interesting. Well, it worked. It worked. It shouldn't have worked. I'm going to be honest with you. It shouldn't have worked. Because in order to follow the kind of an arc that somebody like Augustine had, and you chose the absolute extreme version of this. You're talking about somebody who's utterly depraved. And
Mhm.
I have to say, like, this is one of the least, and I mean this as a compliment, it's one of the least likable main characters I have ever met in fiction, period. Like, the guy is a total, I mean, he's despicable. He's utterly despicable. Okay,
I
so
could have made him more
you
despicable.
could have, but then,
There's a chapter where I pulled back and I
oh,
think I
did
would have
you?
lost with his mother when he has to make that choice about whether to leave his mother.
Oh,
If he
you
did
had him
make that
leaving his
choice.
mother initially.
No, no, I never did. But I just know that if I had taken that step, the book, no one would have read this book. Too grim.
Yeah, I think that might have broken a lot of people.
Yeah.
I think some people probably put the book down for a short period of time during that Breaking Bad moment in chapter four. I think chapter four. Um,
Yeah. Uh, yes. I was going to say the prologue, which was inspired by Breaking Bad to a certain point. The
Oh,
actual
the
prologue
prologue. The
itself.
prologue is intense. The prologue is, but I mean, if you can get past that, that's fine. I
Yeah,
mean
the
more
store.
when he in the store. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what I'm thinking about. That for me, that was like I had to put the book down for a little bit and take a few breaths. I'm like, okay, because we haven't yet encountered the aliens. It's
yeah.
all it's so for those of you who are in the beginnings parts of this, there is a point to all of this. Now, um, I want to start getting into. We've been talking for about half an hour or so. So those of you who are spoiler averse, just be aware you may have to plug your ears a little bit. I want to speak with a little more freedom with Michael here because there are many
Let's
things
do
I
it.
want to discuss about this book. Okay, so Virgil, the character of Virgil, where did he come from? Is there a actual person you're thinking of? What's the inspiration for him? Because honestly, one of the most interesting characters I've ever read.
Yeah, he's everyone's favorite. I'd
Yep.
say it goes him and then Father Ambrose. Virgil from the Divine Comedy was the
That
inspiration.
that's it's that simple.
It's that simple. And can I write as Dante did? No, obviously not. So what I just had in mind was with the book I wanted to play it straight. I think that's what people find so kind of shocking about the book. I imagined myself I was imagining myself this being adapted and somehow I was allowed into the writer's room of like the the TV series of this book.
Yeah.
And I'm saying the aliens actually believe it. Like there's no season 5 twist that they were
Yeah.
just faking so they could get the gold from Earth. They actually believe it, you secular Hollywood knuckleheads. Like they actually do. And that can be extremely dramatic because the dilemmas that your desires and what you're called to do are like the best conflicts that you can have. And I know you've probably lost that in your Hollywood secular kind of career, but get out of this writer's room if you don't believe it. So in my head, I'm just like, this will be so shocking to people. So it was Virgil, but what would a saint do in every one of these situations was how I played it. And it's just so strange coming from an alien robot that I think it's very affecting to people. And I had editors who, definitely not Christian. I don't I don't know all their biography, but they wouldn't seem like they'd take to a work like this. But
Yeah.
like my copy edit notes are like, Virgil, I love him. He's so good. And I think that speaks to kind of a thirst of in our kind of ironic and distant culture, just like earnest, a paragon of virtue is so shocking to people when it's executed in a way that they can take in. So that
Okay,
was
so
that was
so you
inspiration.
just you just said something that's really brilliant, and I wanna highlight this because I'm not sure intentional this was. You can tell me if it was or not. So there is plenty of interesting sci-fi, especially in the weird space. People like Gene Wolfe and things like this, where you have artificial intelligences that either because of their programming or because of some glitch in their programming are religious by nature. And it's always a very interesting twist that happens in these stories. In particular, I'm thinking of the book of the Long Sun for those of you who are hardcore Gene Wolfe fans, where there's a sisterhood of robot nuns who worship who is effectively a false god, and it ends up that these robots are actually the ones who point the way to a kind of worship towards a true god, which is impossible inside the confines of this closed world. And it's very interesting what Gene Wolfe does with it, but he keeps it as robots.
Hmm.
He doesn't actually have that twist in the end like you do. So I think what you did, whether you like it or not, is that you presented a a shocking possibility to the reader that this AI, first of all, is sentient.
Hmm.
That's what it seems like at first, and like it or not, this is what is front of mind for a lot of people. And I know at least one person in our audience here will agree with me that as he was reading, he was like, I'm not sure about this. Robots praying. I'm not sure about this. But the point is that to present a character that is going to be a paragon of virtue for a modern reader is a very difficult thing because their cringe filter is very high. Anybody who acts morally because just because of a virtuous nature, because he seeks virtue as its own end, is not something that's easy for people to to understand. So you put it into what it seems to be an artificial intelligence, which immediately puts enough of a distance between the reader and humanity to think, oh, that's cool. I wonder how that's going to work. And then at the end, when you pull the veil back and you recognize that actually this is just an avatar of one of the aliens, and there actually is no artificial intelligence. It's just the kind of physical body for the manipulation in another area, kind of I don't know how you would call that. Um,
Drone,
yeah,
maybe.
a drone. Yeah, exactly. Um, at that point, everybody is willing to accept it because they've come to love the robot, not the
Yeah.
human. And so and when you make that robot into a person, that leap isn't such a difficult one to make. And so everybody's going to accept it. Those who are not religious are going to be like, okay, that's cool. I didn't expect that because it's a twist. But those who are religious and have problems with the idea of the singularity as an actual possibility are like, okay, Michael, you're off the hook. So
Yeah.
I thought it was really brilliant. Was that like, did you have that in mind the whole way through? Was that an accident? Like, how did you figure that out?
You put it so well, Nicholas. I can't pretend that I did it in quite the way you did. I don't think I thought of it as you need to create this distance
Yeah.
of an artificial life that somehow people will believe, but if it was a real character, they'd find it cringe. Maybe that was in my subconscious, certainly not my conscious. And
Cool.
that is so true. It's weird. Like, there's a reason Spock and Data from Star Trek, like, we accept them as being
Yes.
superhuman and more virtuous, and we love them for
Yeah.
it, even
Yes.
if it's not real. It's like if, and I never really had thought about it, but you're opening my eyes as I see it. I did have a desire because I do have the Catholic hylomorphic kind of attitude of body soul connection, and I don't like how AI is depicted in books. I think, frankly, at MIT I got this. Like, I
Hmm.
would sit in rooms with august professors at the
That's ground
leading
zero for
edge.
that sort of thing, right?
Absolutely. And they would talk as if we're going to create God in the box. It was really actually interesting having an undergraduate experience at Boston College and then going to a technical school like MIT. And they're both, I mean, I have wonderful things to say about MIT, but it was like, you haven't read you could tell they had none of that Western underpinning of like where our thoughts come from.
Yeah.
So they didn't even know they were raising philosophical and not scientific questions with regard to sentience for AIs and things like
Yep.
that. And I would come down very unimpressed by their arguments about why we're going to essentially create consciousness inside a
Yeah.
computer and go like, no, I don't think you know the first thing about consciousness, let alone they're created. And that when you say a neural net, you're talking about just that is extrapolating from a study about one optic nerve that you just replicated in scale. So you're scaling from a singular optic nerve neuron to the mind itself. Like, it's called the leap of logic there, buddy. Like, you're supposed to be a statistician. You're not supposed to make inferences that you can't support. But this was all over them. So I'm very much in the camp that we can create great simulacrums. I think large language models are proving that you can do some
Yeah.
really interesting things. They're clearly going to get better. But the kind of ability to create uh, basically the human mind as we understand it will not be ever replicated by artificial means. And what does that look? I mean, let me be wrong. I could stand to be wrong on that, but I'm willing to put my chips there.
Yeah.
So in my world, when I'm writing it, there's actually a line that Virgil says,
Yeah.
humans think that computation power alone can create a mind, but a mind is a singular thing.
That's right.
And
He
it's
says it
kind of like
twice to
Dune.
underscore it.
Yeah, it's kind of like Dune. He wrote out AI because it does, if you take it to its logical conclusions, it ruins all worlds that you could build in.
Yeah.
So that's why Frank Herbert did it. I'm doing it because I don't think it's ever going to happen. So
Yep.
I wanted the aliens to show up and say, like, dear humans, like, this is one of your you're going to look back at this time when you thought like you could put enough silicon in a room to create a mind as phrenology or some other junk science that we've
Right.
long gone away from and
Exactly.
mock
Exactly.
now.
The I thought it was very brave of you to allow for the possibility that the actual events of the historical Jesus, including the crucifixion and resurrection, were physically recorded. So I thought that was an unexpected twist for me. I didn't see that coming, which is hard to do for me because I've read a lot of stuff, so I expect things to come before they do. That was a very pleasant twist, and also I commend you. I would just want to say this: I commend you for being honest with the fact that in this age, especially in the age of AI generated, you know, uh, the authentication of a video is going to be a very difficult thing, even if it's clearly historically verifiable. So I thought that was very smart of you to allow for the kind of the initial possibility of, okay, that's it, all the questions have been answered, and then immediately after that, the general's like, it's fake, it's obviously fake. So I thought that was very smart.
I'll just add to that. You talk about other kind of reasons I wrote the book, and it's probably one I forgot to mention, or there's a multitude, so I don't have to cover them all. But one of them was a rejoinder against the argument from divine hiddenness.
Mm,
And for people who are unfamiliar, that's one of the arguments for atheism, or for the non-theism, if you want to say that. And it says something along the lines, better people can do the syllogism better than me, but if God is all good, then God will want everyone to know him. Not everyone knows God, ergo, God does not exist.
yeah.
Something along those lines. And this argument, actually, personally, for me, was quite compelling, not from a rational
No,
perspective,
it's an
but
emotional argument.
it very much is. And I feel that way about the problem of evil.
Yeah,
Intellectually, that's
totally.
not had a lot of purchase with me, but I recognize that that is probably one of the biggest obstacles to belief in God.
Yes.
But I had this feeling that divine hiddenness is actually maybe bigger than problem of evil. Some people have called it a subset of the problem of evil,
Yeah.
but the my I was like, I want you can just kind of refute that quickly, but there's a reason Jesus uses parables. Like stories are a way of conveying information that can't be conveyed any other way. And
Absolutely.
I would love it if they're like, yeah, it's like pilgrims, like even if God showed up in the sky, it's going to be like pilgrims, everything goes to pot. And I firmly believe that. And so it's really funny, like for example, I did speak to Matt Fradd briefly, and he told me the hesitancy to read Catholic fiction, which I don't call it Catholic fiction, I call it
No,
sci-fi.
this is not Catholic fiction. This is proper sci-fi. And I'll
This
explain
is
what I mean in a
sci-fi.
second. Yeah.
Yeah, please. But he was like, I'm reluctant because you feel like you're going to get preached at, and everyone imagines a Kirk Cameron movie that's
That's
preaching to the
different.
choir. No one wants to sit and watch it. But uh, the um, sorry, I was saying that well, so there's a lot of reluctance, and they're kind of shocked with the prologue and what happens, because I obviously am writing a world that not everything goes well. You see that right in the prologue as soon as it starts. The stakes are high. It might be Catholic aliens, but it's not kumbaya and guitars. It's, oh, this is going to be kind of dark in its own way.
Oh yeah.
This author clearly doesn't see it, and some readers are not willing to go on that journey. But that's genuinely how I feel about uh, God's revealing himself. To quote Father Ambrose later in the book, it's my belief that God's hiddenness is a mercy, a compassion in disguise. And so that's reflected in the book. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to write it.
So I want to follow up on this question that Matt raised about Catholic fiction versus other fiction that has notes of Catholicism or Christianity in general. Obviously, this is something that I have to deal with all the time with my own work, and it's a question that I've had to ask myself in terms of how do you market your stuff, because even in the question of, for the self-published author, which categories do you choose in Amazon? Do you choose Christian fantasy, Christian sci-fi? Because those categories exist, and almost by default, I don't usually, because of that um, bias towards a kind of evangelical kind of fiction that is that is not widely popular and is not for a mass audience. Now, I will continue to make the argument, and I'll make it to Matt Fradd in case he actually sees this, that this is proper sci-fi because it treats theology like a science. This book does, and all of the long conversations that are had about the technical problems of the hiddenness of God, the historicity of the Gospels, of the person of Jesus, etc., etc. All these things that are kind of that can be in incorrect context reduced to mere talking points. Here are applied as a science fiction writer doing hard science. So this is a hard sci-fi novel where the science is theology, and it works really well. Now, have you read The Three Body Problem? Um,
Yes,
okay,
absolutely.
so when you do the China thing,
Mhm.
I would love it if you somehow not obviously don't make callbacks to that series, but that series is like the flip side of your book, because
Yeah.
it is the hard sci-fi version of materialism, and
Mhm.
it takes it to the absolute limit, and it's absolutely brilliant for it. It's a fantastic series. So, did you have that in mind at all when you were writing this?
Yeah, I was informed by like all the stuff. I don't think I said like this book will be the counterpoint to the three body problem, although
Yeah,
it really is in a lot of
it
ways.
is.
And yeah, including the aliens are known to humanity before they show up. Instead of centuries, we have 5 years,
Yeah.
and whatnot. But one of the striking things about being kind of a fallen away Catholic, pretty call me an agnostic or call me an atheist while I'm really doing my work there, and encountering a truly a society that's riven by the Marxist materialist worldview. And that would be my number one advice to clients. China's communist. And they'd be like, no, it's not. They've got iPhones over there. No, it's still communist. This suffuses everything, and the party is everywhere.
Yeah.
And they just wouldn't believe me. But that being said, I really had to encounter like what it's like to exist in another uh, worldview that permeates everything all
Yeah.
the way, and it really does. In fact, but it's worth noting there are a lot of Christians in China,
Yes.
and there's this deep thirst for meaning that a lot of people are finding it in Christianity, and it's suppressed and it's terrible. But they are the kind of the apex of the materialistic worldview, and I definitely wanted to write it as a rebuke. I mean, the stuff that happens to China is partly what I think would happen. And so it is kind of a rebuke to the three body problem in that way. I'm a lover of the three body problem
Me
as a
too.
work.
Yeah.
I think it's brilliant. But there, when you read it, I think there's a scene in one of the either the second or the third novel of the trilogy where it's just kind of mentioned, but they build a giant cross in space, and then it like Ross. It's like, well, I can tell the author has no idea what religion is, and
Yeah.
Christianity is in particular. Like
Yeah.
they innocently just have true no knowledge, and
Hmm.
it's so. I'm reading it going like, it would be so much better if Six and Liu could actually kind of address the metaphysical kind of turmoil, even if they come down on the materialist claims. But I think that that's just asking too much. That's above their pay grade based on their background and living in China. And I'm saying that to someone who can say for sure. And I want to comment on one thing we said about the science of like the theology is a scientific thing.
Yeah.
There's a chapter where I explain the transubstantiation, and the and I that was accompanied by a lot of prayer because I'm in no position to really explain that well. So this is very much like the dummy's guide to it, and I hope it's not totally incorrect, but
I thought it was
um,
very strong actually. I liked it a lot. It was just
well,
simple enough for common audience. So I liked it a lot.
well, and one of the things that, like I said, a lot of gamers have found my book because the audiobook was done by a guy who's super popular in the gaming community and larger because his audiobook production is on another level.
It's
But
amazing. Yeah.
yeah, he's doing something else, and he's breaking molds, and that's why I demanded that he did my book, and he was willing. This is not what he normally does, and
Yeah.
he made an exception, and yeah, I thought it came out brilliantly. But they get to that chapter where we're explaining the transubstantiation, and I was like, this is where I'm just going to lose all the gamers because this is kind of the most expositional talking. There's a twist in the chapter that makes it more conflict oriented, but I kind of just need to explain this. But people were really into it because if you're into video games, a lot of video
Yes.
game narrative
It's
has
lore. It's all lore.
exposition. It's
Yeah.
it's it's all lore. And I go, it's so cool because my alien lore is just Catholic or Christian lore. And people can kind of get into that. And somehow it doesn't get just like flushed down the toilet of people so it was really cool to have people being like, this is so interesting. And I'd often get these comments, especially from my non-religious readers saying, I don't know what was more alien, the aliens or the Catholics. And I'm like, that's what I
There
want.
you go.
This is
There you go.
this is the alien world that you can go experience down the street, sir. Turn off the television and walk into the to Holy Mass and experience it.
It just shows you how far we've come as a culture. An apparently formerly or recently Christian or still Christian culture where people have literally no idea of the basic principles, tenets of the faith, much less what the actual experience is of being inside a house of worship for any important day of worship or feast day or anything like this.
It's a
So
huge
yeah,
opportunity for us artists. I mean, it's a terrible, but there's always
absolutely
hope,
true.
right? So let's make good use of that, I think. That's my perspective.
Totally. I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I was very affected by. I mean, obviously, the scene with the extermination of the Arabian Peninsula was just heart wrenching, especially having it happen twice, and the bravery of putting the prologue where it is, and it just creates such an interesting and set, tension-filled sense of dread as things are unfolding, because you're seeing the obvious virtue of these aliens and how they've come in some sense to offer us a better way, and yet you know this is all going to go south, and you're just wondering, how is it going to happen? How is it going to happen? How can it possibly happen? And then it happens, and it makes sense within the story, and you're like, okay, that's impressive. He managed that. But I'm, I'm listening to it. I'm thinking about it. I'm stopping in the middle of my listening to kind of take some space to think about, kind of let it all ferment a little bit, because it was very intense. And I wonder if any of this was, and if you don't want to answer this, it's fine, because this is a bit of a difficult question. But I've been thinking a lot about what does it mean to be a Christian with a sword, as opposed to a Christian who turns the other cheek, and the history of Catholic Church in particular, but certainly the Christian Church at large, is filled with historical moments of violence and terrible, terrible realities that are painful to recall. And is any of that? Are you thinking at all about the Crusades or anything like this when you're describing that particular scene?
No, I wasn't. I wasn't thinking of the Crusades. I can honestly say when I wrote it, the image popped into my mind of that happening, and I knew it was at the midpoint and I of the novel, or close to the midpoint, somewhere there. And I was like, if I can just get a reader with my Catholic Aliens novel to this point. And then it just dawned on me, a la Breaking Bad. If you ever watch the first episode,
Yeah,
it starts with the RV going crazy and all these people, and then it cuts to Walter White in a classroom. We kind of have to follow him and how he goes from his boring life to that crazy
right,
moment.
right.
And then so that's kind of how it came into my mind, because as a author, I feel like I owe the audience my honesty, right? Like that's all I could. You might not like my story, but you can appreciate that I'm just going to tell you the story how I think it would unfold. And truly, if there would be, um, aliens showing up in the sky who were pronouncing Catholicism, I think there'd be a lot of religious tension, specifically on the fault line between Christianity and Islam. I think there would be other fault lines for sure, but it's there. And in my world, rightly, I think if aliens are approaching Earth and we know they're coming, nuclear non-proliferation goes out the window right away. And we live in, the nuclear bomb is a 70-year-old technology at this point. People don't really think of that. They think of like, and so if we just kind of as a world all became really gung-ho on producing them, they would be everywhere instantly.
Yeah,
And that opens up a lot of potential call lines. So I wasn't thinking of the Crusades. I will say that insofar as I am sending a message, it's with the title of the prologue. None of my chapters are named, but I call it Saint Innocent of Riyadh, which implies that Monsignor Innocenti is actually canonized at some point in the
yeah,
future.
yeah,
So I'm putting my kind of ethical and Catholic perspective on that moment. If you read the prologue, there's essentially a big debate between an Saudi Arabian doctor who's Muslim and a priest who seems to escape or leaves the Italian embassy, because you're not allowed to openly be a priest in Saudi Arabia.
hmm,
That it's forbidden by law. Wearing your Roman collar or any sort of clerical garb is forbidden. And so there are priests, I think, who practice there in secret. And I think on embassy soil you could have a priest, but that's
yeah,
about it.
yeah,
So I call him Saint Innocent, where some people could take the perspective that what he's doing to the infants is not allowed. He's essentially baptizing them to spare their lives, to
right,
save them in multiple senses
yeah,
of the word. And his name is Innocenti because in Florence there was an old nunnery where there was a bell that you could ring the bell and leave a child in medieval Florence.
okay,
And all of the infants were given the surname Innocenti, the innocents. And so if you go to like the Florentine phone book, not that anyone uses phone books now, it's like the eyes last forever because so many are descended
oh
from
my
an
gosh, that's
Innocenti
hilarious.
along the way.
Wow.
So that's why. So Monsignor Innocenti is the descendant, if not an orphan himself.
Mhm.
And there is an actual debate about two religions. I say that these children are orphans, so their parents aren't alive. So who's their caretaker, the doctor or the Monsignor?
Yeah,
Well, the doctor is clearly of their culture and found them first. But does he have when we talk about guardianship, we talk about best interests. And the best interests of those child, from my perspective, was to get us baptized as fast as possible.
yeah.
And I don't say that simply as to spare their lives, which is true in that circumstance, but as a Catholic who believes we need to baptize everyone in the world. So that's my answer to that hard question. I do kind of come down, and it's revealed in the title of that and how you felt. But I don't, obviously, if you didn't hear me describe this, most people's, I think, experience of that chapter, they know it's a moral dilemma, but they probably couldn't specify it the way I did just now and have opinions. I'm just being honest. I'm not endorsing this. I mean, basically, the rest of the novel is a condemnation of this. And the other part is, if you have all these perfect seeming Christians in the sky, I think a lot of the reason people deconvert is because they see Christians not being good Christians, like Saint Peter, renouncing our Lord, and like this is the perennial problem of the faith, the earthen vessel that it's kept in, and it's a difficult problem, and it's one that we're going to have to contend with until the second coming. Like we don't get out of this if the aliens are seemingly really good Catholics. Sorry to disappoint, but um, the I don't show the uh, Muslims in my story apostatizing. Like they die martyrs from their perspective. I think I'm careful, and I'm careful to not endorse this sort of thing. So
It's
while
very
my
realistic. It's very realistic. That's how
yeah,
that's
I think
what would
my
happen.
Muslim readers are kind of like, yeah, okay, like yeah, Catholic aliens show up. This could happen, and I would hate it, and I'm like, I also would hate it. This is not what I want to happen, and it's just funny because it's my non-Muslim readers, and if I had to put a finger on it, the more secular ones who look at that, I think with a little bit more kind of hesitancy than I think. I think the religious reader is like, no, no, that's it. You're going to die for your beliefs because I might, and that person might, and that's what it boils down to. So I thought that's worth throwing in there. To the extent that my Muslim readers have reviewed it, they have been positive.
Yeah, no, it's I think it's a realistic response to a very difficult dramatic problem. Okay, so final thing before we let people in to ask their own questions is this. I've wrestled with the question of uh, how does an alien race who is assured of the truth of Christ's human incarnation have access to sacraments when they are, it would seem, limited to the human? Because the theology of the sacraments is that Christ becomes a human. Therefore, it is through emulation of specifically his incarnation, is becoming a human, that we can then partake of salvation. So this is a thorny problem. I don't think you can resolve it in a conversation like this. But I found it interesting that your motivation for them was not necessarily to partake of the sacraments, but it was allow them to be the site of the mass being performed. So they're not looking to be baptized. They're not looking for communion. They're just looking to become the hosts of the host, so to speak. Am I barking up the right tree here?
Yeah, I will say that, my book ends with Catholic aliens on Earth. There's resolution for Austin, but this is probably like T plus 45 days since they arrive when we get to the end of the book. The series, and I expect this to be a trilogy, will continue with some time, and that will come up. Um, with regard to the sacraments, I'm not an expert on this, but there's a surprising amount of smart people talking about it. I don't think with deep magisterial authority,
Right.
but like for example, Jimmy Akin does a lot. Jimmy Akin is a Catholic apologist. He works for Catholic Answers, and
Hmm.
he's kind of a mega mind from my perspective. And he has multiple episodes on his podcast, Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, talking or Catholic Answers, his show, where a radio show where people call in asking about these questions, like could aliens be baptized and such. What I wanted to do is there. I think the question is depends on which sacrament.
Hmm.
Holy orders. Is that possible for aliens? I actually kind of come down in my book, no, for but I don't know that that's the official answer. It seems like that should be the right answer to me, but I'm again way above my pay grade. In terms of baptism, though, my understanding is that there's a lot of consensus in the Roman Catholic Church that might be appropriate, although not definitive. So I wanted to locate it as they have this, you know, we expect these super aliens to have, I don't know, Star Trek desires. They want to seek out new life and explore new worlds. And it's like, well, if you live multiple thousands of years in basically a post scarcity society,
Yeah.
I don't think you're so into that. I think you
Yeah.
send out probes and you want to be as close to God as you can.
Hmm.
And as far as we know, God is only present in substantial form on this here planet in this here galaxy. So you try to get as close to that God as you possibly
Yeah.
can, the one true God. And so when, to the extent that they want to do a Eucharistic adoration, which is not really a sacrament. They just want to be close to the sacrament. I just thought that was just the obvious thing they'd want to do. We can settle these doctrinal matters over the next millennia or two, but just get us into close proximity. And I think I love that as an idea. I wish I felt the call to go across the galaxy to be near the Blessed Eucharist as much myself. And so it's projection a little bit. I think that's just a beautiful image.
Yeah, it's a beautiful place to stop the official part of this conversation.